But first, tomorrow in Western Park there will be a ceremony to commemorate lives lost to suicide. The suicide rate for the ACT is now at its highest for over a decade. So far this year it stands at 43. The latest research indicates that it needs to be talked about more often and more openly. Recently on Stateline we reported on the issue of suicide, its causes and its horrible effects, particularly on the families who are left with the loss and the grief. That report prompted a viewer to get in touch to share his story. His name is Craig. His partner killed herself in 2009 after suffering from a rare mental illness called puerperal or postnatal psychosis. Craig wants to turn his story and his experiences into something useful for other families.
I think it's important to tell the stories of people who died of suicide with the hope of getting some change in the system and how people look at the events that lead up to it and the person's life.
How difficult is it to have that conversation?
It's actually quite scary because I don't necessarily talk to lots of people about it. Most of my work colleagues know that my partner died. But yeah, when you tell people for the first time, they look at you a bit funny, and it takes them a little while to get over the fact that somebody killed themselves, because it's not a really accepted way or usual way of people dying. Usually it's end of life and you've had a bit of a build-up, or it's a car accident and it's quite acceptable. But killing yourself, has a real stigma associated with it.
Do you detect any way in which society's dealing with it differently?
I think there's more conversations about it nowadays. But yeah, for people who it happens, the people left behind, the families, it's all quite raw and in some ways a little bit shameful because the person killed themselves and you think, oh, this is really quite shocking. Yeah, so I think things are changing. So my partner, she was normal, healthy person, no history of mental illness. We had a baby. Normal pregnancy, the birth was quite a long and traumatic birth. Then we had lots of visitors and the normal sort of chaos that you have when a baby's born. We left hospital a couple of days later, 4 days later, and then we got home and the wheels started falling off. So postnatal psychosis, the person loses touch with reality. She started seeing auras and she thought her breast milk could save the world. And she's, thought the washing machine had a bit of a life of its own. And that was quite a cute stage actually, because it's all very new and you go, oh, that's quite odd. After the psychosis, they calm down and they come to a bit more of an even keel, but then after that there's quite often depression that happens, and so they just lose all interest in life and become really, really sad inside. It's not something I'd ever heard about, so that was a bit of an eye-opener that this was one of those reasonably rare complications of childbirth that people become psychotic. So it affects about one woman in 500 births, and so it's just not very common at all. Yeah, so people go, what is that? Can you go mad from childbirth? And they're all quite a lot surprised when they hear that.
And it's the last thing you expect. You're just going through a birth experience that you think is just what everyone else goes through, and then you come out the other end and things have changed so dramatically. Is that the case?
Oh, that's right. And at the time you don't really know what's going on because it was our first baby and we had nothing really to measure it against, no yardsticks to go what's normal, what's not. It was just, this is a birth and now we've got a baby and now we're at home and things are just happening. They mostly gave her drugs, antipsychotics and antidepressants to try and treat it. There was no real behaviour or interventions. They didn't really come and try and teach her how to live with the illness and cope with it and do the things that she wanted to do despite her feelings of sadness and hopelessness and helplessness. And yeah, nothing really prepares you for looking after somebody who's mentally ill. I'd seen my grandparents get dementia and my parents look after them. But yeah, looking after an old person and your partner who you've done things together with, you've helped look after each other, to suddenly become their carer and have them dependent on you is just really quite an overwhelming experience. Like, in many ways, I looked at the role and seen what happened with my grandparents. Thought, caring's about cooking and cleaning and making sure the house is tidy and that they've got clean clothes on, and looking after somebody with a mental illness is really, really different to that. And I still don't know that I fully understand what's needed. All I know is that I was dumped in a situation and told, here you go, cope with it. I spent weeks looking on the internet and asking people that, what do I need to do? What supports are there? Nobody really had an answer. But there was no real discussion about how do you actually look after an ill person at home. I made that up as I went along, and I didn't even know that it was a question I needed to ask. Everything's going on. It's all quite overwhelming. You don't have the space or time to stop and think about the practicalities of that, or even realise that that's a thing you need to ask about. Yeah, no, I don't think I was particularly well equipped to be a primary carer. But then again, I don't think anybody ever is. It's a job you get because you love the person. It's not because you've got any particular skills. If they organised it differently and said, okay, we want you to do this job, we recognise it's important, and here's some skills and training and support so you can do this job confidently, it really needs to be driven by people who have more experience with the situation rather than you, the first time carer, trying to figure it all out. Yeah, it's not the most sensible way of doing it. You wouldn't put somebody in a non-swimmer in a pool and tell them, yeah, that person over there figured out how to swim, you can do that. It's just, they might make their way to the edge of the pool, then again they might not. I don't know, in many ways I feel that we were that person thrown in the pool and we didn't make it to the edge. Yeah, so we saw the professionals all the way through, and we discussed her feeling suicidal, but we didn't ever discuss what I should be doing in response to that. Emily just didn't really get better, so we then ended up back in Hyson Green, the private psychiatric ward at Calvary, because she became depressed and suicidal. That was after about 2 months. Then we went out of there to QE2 to learn some baby care skills, try and give her some confidence with looking after the baby. And that gave us some confidence, gave me some confidence, but it didn't really help with the depression. And so she then just gradually became more and more depressed until she killed herself at 9 months after Garth was born, just after he's turned 9 months old. I went out in the morning and to drop the car off for a service, and came back and found her dead. So I was like, you can't do this to me. I was really quite angry with her for killing herself. And then panic phone call to the 000 doing CPR, and you're just like, what's going on? Is real disbelief. And the ambulance arrived, and I went, there's a baby in the house. I hadn't thought about him at all. I just saw my dead partner. And I rushed up and found him in his cot. I don't know how long he'd been there alone. And then the rest of the day is all a bit surreal. So the ambulance turned up, and they said, you need to call a friend. So I called a friend, and then the fire brigade turned up, and then the police turned up, and then we all got locked up in the kitchen while the police went through the house. And it's like, now what do I do with the baby? Because he'd been breastfed up to that point. He'd started on bitter solids, but yeah, it's like, now what do I do? He's hungry, and I can't get to his nappies or anything else. So yeah, it was a very odd day. It's a day I definitely don't want to repeat. So my partner killed herself about 18, 20 months ago now, and I had this view that the coronial system had moved reasonably quickly, so the people involved, so that the system could have an opportunity of learning from its mistakes. But at the moment, there's really been no progress about it. There's been no decision. So I really feel the opportunity for actually achieving a change has been lost. And I've been learning more about the coronial system. I had this idea that he would actually review the circumstances of the death and see what could be learned from it. With mental illness, the circumstances leading up to it are really quite messy, and the coronial system is only really interested in nice, simple cause and effect, very, very basic. This happened, then the person died. Whereas for my partner, it's much more of a mess. So the coronial system really isn't going to have a look at that. If we don't stop and take the opportunities as they arise to look at it, we're going to repeat the same mistakes, and it'll be very sad for another family to have the baby to be left with their dad and no mum. I'm just quite sad that they have forgotten that, you know, there's living people around who need some closure on it, and that the system needs some closure on it. You know, the dead person, yeah, they're dead and they don't care, but there's still some living people around who'd like it finished. So I've looked at it and basically gone, well, there's not much I can do there. What can I do individually? So talking to you is one thing. I'm also trying to put together a really practical how-to guide for somebody in my situation, set up as, you know, to-do list. Day one, what do you do? What might you think about? So really practical, nitty-gritty stuff. So a father can come along and go, okay, now what do I do? This is what I need to think about, and then be able to provide some good quality care and have a reasonable discussion with the mental health professionals that are all circling around helping or trying to help, and that might actually get some change happening, or at least get people talking about the issue. So yeah, I've been working on that, putting it together slowly and writing and rewriting, and yeah, it's an interesting process, and it's also helped me work through, you know, try and figure out what's happened in my situation. See ghosts and see memories, and they're good and bad, and sometimes they're funny. You think, but it also gives me an opportunity to discuss things with my son, because I'm trying to build Emily and her stories into his life, so he gets some sense of who his mother was. So yeah, it's just being pragmatic and focusing on, you know, my beautiful little boy. You know, I love him very much, and, you know, we're having a great time together. It definitely teaches you how to live life, because yeah, life doesn't end when somebody dies. It just takes a new course.
And if you or someone you know might be experiencing suicidal thoughts, please call Lifeline on 131114. The Beyond Blue website is also a very good place to seek information.